The debate hall pulsed with electricity. Every seat filled, every camera locked in place. Viewers across the nation leaned closer to their screens, sensing the kind of moment that becomes etched into political folklore. Barron Trump adjusted the microphone, a faint smirk crossing his face as if he had been waiting for this exact setup. The air felt heavy, almost staged by destiny itself, when he leaned forward and declared, "Jasmine Crockett is unfit to serve America." The words cut through the room like a blade. Gasps rippled across the audience, some stunned into silence, others nodding in agreement. Reporters instantly tapped at their devices, pushing out alerts within seconds. Headlines blinked across the nation. Trump targets Crockett, calls her unfit. The insult was not just an attack on a woman, but on everything she represented: resilience, identity, and the communities she stood for. Jasmine sat still, her eyes fixed on Barron, refusing to flinch. Around her, murmurs swelled, a mixture of outrage and intrigue. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sting of something more than politics, an insult laced with history, with arrogance, with entitlement. Barron reveled in the reaction, pausing deliberately, as if savoring the chaos he had unleashed. The moderator's attempts to quiet the room fell flat. The drama had already overtaken order. Viewers at home flooded social media. Hashtags flared to life. Charge unfit. Stand with Jasmine or debate showdown. Allies rushed to defend her in real time, but Jasmine herself remained unshaken. Her silence was not weakness. It was calculation. She folded her hands gently on the podium, her composure radiating something stronger than retaliation: patience. It was the patience of someone who had fought too long, endured too much, to be rattled by the arrogance of privilege. Barron's smirk widened, mistaking her calm for defeat. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already shifting. The audience waited for Jasmine to fire back, to hurl words as sharp as his. But she didn't. Instead, she allowed the insult to linger, to echo, to expose itself for what it was. And as the hall grew restless, as the camera zoomed in on her unbroken gaze, it became clear she was waiting for her moment. A moment that would not come in the form of a rebuttal, but in the form of a revelation. Because Jasmine Crockett had brought something with her that night. Something no one expected. And when she finally revealed it, the entire nation would be left speechless. The insult had barely settled before commentators framed it as a headline moment. But beneath the surface, it was far more than that. This wasn't just a clash of words between two politicians. It was the embodiment of two Americas, colliding on a single stage. On one side stood Barron Trump, the heir to a dynasty built on wealth and spectacle, his every step cushioned by the legacy of his last name. On the other was Jasmine Crockett, the daughter of perseverance, who had clawed her way into public life not by inheritance, but by service, sacrifice, and a relentless fight for dignity. The contrast was glaring. Barron wielded bravado like a family heirloom, confident that swagger alone would secure dominance. He leaned into his father's style of attack, cut deep, smile wider, and never retreat. His words were designed not for dialogue but for domination. To remind Jasmine, and by extension the millions, watching, that power was still stamped with the Trump name. Jasmine, however, understood something deeper. Her strength was never measured by volume or theatrics. It lived in the quiet resilience that had carried her through courts, campaigns, and countless attempts to silence her voice. Every insult she had endured had taught her that character. Not privilege was the true test of fitness to serve, and now in this arena, those lessons became her shield. The stakes of this confrontation extended beyond the debate hall. For Barron, victory meant affirming that the Trump legacy was unbroken, that power could still be inherited and wielded without question. For Jasmine, victory meant something larger, proving that America's promise belonged to those who earned it, who fought for it, who served with humility rather than entitlement. The crowd sensed the weight of it. Some leaned forward, caught between discomfort and fascination. Others whispered, uneasy at the venom cloaked in Barron's words. The nation itself seemed to pause, split between two visions of leadership, one born of privilege, the other of perseverance. What most in the room didn't know was that Jasmine had come prepared for this very moment. Her campaign team had warned her that Barron would come swinging, that he would use arrogance as a weapon, and while others might have crafted a clever rebuttal or rehearsed a fiery retort, Jasmine had chosen a different path. She carried with her something far more devastating than words: evidence. Hidden within her folder was a recording, one that spoke louder than any speech she could deliver. It was not just a defense. It was a mirror, one that reflected Barron's contradictions with brutal clarity. She hadn't planned to use it unless provoked, unless his attacks reached beyond the political into the personal, and tonight he had crossed that line. The cameras kept panning between them, Barron radiating smug confidence. To the casual viewer, it looked like he had the upper hand. But to those who studied her eyes closely, there was a spark, a certainty that she knew something he didn't. The tension built like a drumbeat, each second stretching longer than the last. Commentators whispered about whether she would fight back, whether she had the fire to match his fury. But Jasmine was not interested in matching him. She was preparing to eclipse him, because this debate was no longer about policy points or applause lines. It had become a defining struggle over who America believes is truly fit to lead. And as Barron basked in his moment, Jasmine's silence whispered of something much greater, something waiting to be unleashed. She carried with her a truth so undeniable that when it finally emerged, it would not just shake Barron Trump, it would shake the nation. Barron Trump's rise into the political spotlight was not a story of struggle, but of inheritance. From the moment he stepped into public life, his last name carried him further than most could dream, opening doors that others spent lifetimes trying to unlock. Cameras followed him not because he had earned the attention, but because of the family crest etched into his identity. In many ways, he embodied the continuation of a dynasty, a Trump who could extend the brand into another generation, a living reminder of a name that had already dominated America's political imagination. The young Trump leaned into that identity, tall, polished, and armed with the confidence of someone who had never truly been told no. He presented himself as untouchable. His speeches carried echoes of his father's cadence, sharp jabs, memorable insults, and the unwavering belief that volume and bravado could bend reality itself. Where others hesitated, he charged forward. Where opponents explained policy, he dismissed it as weakness. To him, politics wasn't about serving. It was about winning. And winning, he believed, was in his blood. Crowds fascinated by the Trump mystique cheered him on. To supporters, Barron was not just a new politician, he was a symbol of legacy, a continuation of the brash style that shook Washington years before. Every insult he lobbed drew headlines. Every staged smirk was dissected as though it were strategy rather than instinct. He framed his opponents as irrelevant, mocked their credentials, and reduced their service to footnotes in a play where only his last name mattered. Unfit was his favorite weapon, a single word designed to strip away decades of sacrifice with the swipe of arrogance. But beneath the polish of his image, there was fragility. Barron had never fought for survival in the way his opponents had. He had not scraped his way through school on scholarships or balanced multiple jobs to chase opportunity. He had not sat in quiet offices with constituents desperate for help. His privilege shielded him from those realities, leaving him with confidence, yes, but not depth. And though he believed himself invincible, it was precisely that lack of experience that made him vulnerable to those who had weathered storms he couldn't imagine. In debate after debate, he relied on performance over substance. He wielded charisma like a weapon, throwing barbs that made for viral clips. Commentators compared him to his father, calling him sharper, smoother, perhaps even more dangerous. But what they failed to notice was that his opponents were beginning to learn his rhythm. They saw the pattern, an insult here, a dismissal there, and always the assumption that no one could touch him. Arrogance became not just his armor, but his entire identity. To admit fault would be to fracture the myth he carried. To acknowledge weakness would be to betray the Trump brand. So he doubled down again and again, believing that power meant never apologizing, never yielding, never listening. When he called Jasmine Crockett unfit, it was not merely a slip of arrogance. It was the culmination of everything he believed about himself and others. To Barron, she represented the antithesis of his world, a woman who had earned her place rather than inherited it, who spoke from lived experience rather than scripted bravado. He dismissed her not because he didn't recognize her strength, but because he had never been taught to value strength that wasn't wrapped in privilege. And yet, woven into that insult was the seed of his undoing. For while arrogance had elevated him, had turned him into a figure too big to ignore, it also blinded him. He mistook Jasmine's silence for surrender. He mistook her patience for weakness. And he mistook the crowd's gasps as confirmation of his own. Dominance rather than the warning, signs of a tide turning against him. The irony was sharp. The very confidence that carried him into politics, that made him a spectacle, that convinced him he could not fall, would soon betray him. Because arrogance is a fragile armor, one that cracks under the weight of truth. And Barron Trump was about to learn that lesson in the harshest way possible. The insult that echoed in the debate hall was not just another line in his arsenal. It was the spark, the opening crack in his invincible facade. And as the cameras lingered on Jasmine Crockett's unflinching stare, the stage was set for the moment that would unravel him completely. Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin beneath chandeliers or on golden stages. It began in neighborhoods where hard work wasn't an option but a survival skill, where families leaned on one another because the world outside often seemed determined to overlook them. Her parents taught her the value of dignity early, dignity in labor, dignity in honesty, dignity in refusing to bow when life pressed hardest. While Barron Trump's name opened doors, Jasmine had to knock until her knuckles bled. From the start, she faced obstacles that were less about ability and more about perception. Teachers underestimated her, assuming quiet strength meant lack of ambition. Employers doubted her, mistaking resilience for meekness. Colleagues dismissed her, labeling her passion as impractical. But every dismissal lit a fire. Each time someone underestimated Jasmine Crockett, she learned to carry herself with sharper resolve. Her journey into public service wasn't paved with endorsements or family wealth. It was carved from nights spent studying until dawn, from cases taken on for clients who could not pay, from hours listening to voices no one else would hear. In courtrooms and community halls, she learned to fight battles that others ignored: tenant rights, worker protections, children left behind by broken systems. She became a voice not by choice but by necessity, because silence would have meant complicity. There were countless times she was told she didn't belong. Male colleagues smirked when she entered the room, waiting for her to stumble. Opponents called her too emotional, too young, or too radical. But she endured, and with each dismissal, she carved a reputation not as someone who shouted the loudest, but as someone who showed up when it mattered most. She built credibility the hard way, case by case, conversation by conversation, win by win, and people noticed. Working-class families saw in her a reflection of their own grit. Immigrants saw in her story the echo of their sacrifices, the long hours, the uphill climbs, the dreams too precious to abandon. For those who felt unseen, Jasmine Crockett became proof that their struggles mattered, that their voices could rise from the margins to the very center of power. Still, the path was never smooth. With every success came new attacks, sharper and more personal. She was mocked for her appearance, her accent, her roots. Political opponents worked tirelessly to paint her as inexperienced, unfit, or out of her depth. Yet unlike those born into legacy, Jasmine carried scars that became her strength. She had already survived storms that would have drowned others. She had faced rejection not once, but 1,000 times, and still stood taller each time she was pushed back. Her service wasn't about image. It was about impact. When disaster struck, she was there in neighborhoods distributing aid. When policies threatened to silence the vulnerable, she was on the floor challenging them. Her reputation was not one of convenience, but of consistency. She did not wait for cameras to appear before acting. She acted because people needed her, whether the world was watching or not. That authenticity became her armor. While others rehearsed lines for debates, Jasmine's preparation was lived experience. She did not need to memorize talking points because her truths were embedded in every battle she had already fought. Her story was not written by strategists. It was etched in the lives of those she had served. And so, when she walked onto the debate stage opposite Barron Trump, she carried more than just her own voice. She carried the weight of every person told they were too small to matter. She carried the echoes of parents who had worked themselves to exhaustion for their children's future. She carried the pride of immigrants who had left everything behind to build something greater. Barron brought a name. Jasmine brought a nation. It was this history, this unshakable grounding, that gave her the composure to sit in silence when he hurled his insult. To the casual observer, she looked passive. To those who knew her journey, she was a warrior waiting for the right moment to strike, not with fury, but with truth. Because Jasmine Crockett understood something Barron never had to learn. True strength does not come from privilege or power. It comes from persistence, from standing tall in the face of endless dismissal, from rising again after being told you don't belong. And these battles, each wound, each slight, each night spent fighting for a voice in a world eager to erase, had prepared her. Prepared her for this stage, for this confrontation, for this exact moment in history. A showdown she never asked for but could not avoid. Jasmine Crockett's life began far from the marble halls of power. She was born into a family that knew the weight of hard days and longer nights, where perseverance was not an inspirational slogan but a daily necessity. Her parents taught her the dignity of work, the kind of work that left hands calloused and backs sore, but hearts steady with pride. They reminded her that no matter how loud the world tried to silence you, your voice mattered if you carried it with conviction. Growing up, Jasmine often felt the quiet sting of being underestimated. Teachers sometimes looked past her, assuming her ambition was smaller than the boy who spoke louder. Classmates dismissed her dreams as unrealistic, pointing out the gap between her background and the polished futures they imagined for themselves. Yet even then, Jasmine learned to turn doubt into fuel. Every time she was told she couldn't, she sharpened her will to prove that she could. When she entered higher education, the obstacles only grew sharper. Professors questioned her ability to keep up. Employers hesitated to take chances on someone who didn't fit their narrow mold of leadership. And when she entered the world of law and politics, the underestimation followed her like a shadow. She was told she was too young, too female, too outspoken, too other to lead. But instead of folding under the weight of dismissal, Jasmine persisted. She didn't outshout her critics, she outlasted them. Her career in public service became a testimony to her endurance. She took cases no one else wanted, representing clients who couldn't afford polished attorneys or political connections. She walked into courtrooms where the odds were stacked against her, armed not with privilege but with preparation and grit. Slowly, brick by brick, she built credibility, not the kind handed down by legacy, but the kind earned through sweat and sleepless nights. It was this authenticity that drew people to her. Working-class families saw their own struggles in her persistence. Immigrants saw their own sacrifices, mirrored in her determination to carve a place where none had been given. Dreamers, often left out of the conversation, recognized in Jasmine a leader who not only spoke their language, but understood their silence. She became a vessel for voices that had long gone unheard, and yet, every step forward was met with new challenges. Male colleagues dismissed her as too emotional, as if compassion were a weakness. Commentators framed her as inexperienced, ignoring the depth of her lived battles. Opponents leaned on stereotypes, assuming her resolve could be broken by pressure. But time and again she proved them wrong. For Jasmine, struggle was not a stumbling block. It was the crucible that shaped her strength. Her service extended far beyond policy. When communities flooded, she was there handing out supplies. When schools cried out for resources, she fought on the floor to secure them. She showed up not when cameras were present, but when people needed her most. That consistency built trust, and trust became her most powerful currency. Unlike those who measured success by applause lines or headlines, Jasmine measured it in the lives she touched, the families kept in their homes, the children given opportunities, the elders heard at last. Her journey was never about chasing power for its own sake. It was about lifting those who had been left behind, about ensuring the halls of power reflected the faces of the people they served. For every insult hurled her way, there were countless letters of gratitude, handshakes at town halls, embraces from families who finally felt seen. Those moments anchored her, reminding her that she was not fighting for herself alone. And so, when Jasmine Crockett stood on that debate stage opposite Barron Trump, she carried more than a resume. She carried the weight of the working-class hands that had raised her. She carried the faith of immigrants who had built new lives with nothing but hope. She carried the resilience of dreamers who had been told no again and again and still refused to give up. She carried the dignity of communities who had never been invited into the spotlight, but had always deserved to stand there. Barron Trump may have walked onto that stage with a name that guaranteed him attention, but Jasmine walked on with a story that guaranteed her purpose. And purpose, as she knew well, was stronger than privilege. Her calm in the face of his insult was not submission. It was the steadiness of someone who had survived storms he could not imagine. It was the patience of a fighter who knew timing mattered more than noise. It was the strength of a leader who had already been tested in fires that had left her unbreakable. Because Jasmine Crockett's entire life had been a series of battles against underestimation, against marginalization, against erasure. And each battle had given her something Barron could never inherit: resilience. These battles had prepared her for the showdown she never asked for, but could not avoid. The debate floor had shifted from tense to volatile. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch of expression, every bead of sweat, every weaponized word. Barron Trump leaned forward again, his voice carrying the familiar cadence of his father's bravado, sharp, Dismissive, unapologetically confrontational. "Congresswoman Crockett," he sneered, his tone heavy with condescension, "you can rehearse your talking points all you want, but the truth is simple. You are unfit to serve America." The word unfit echoed, bouncing around the hall like a hammer strike. Supporters in his corner erupted in cheers, their applause swelling as though his insult had been a knockout blow. But not everyone joined in. A low murmur rippled through the undecided audience, uneasy with his relentless attack. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that the debate was veering from discourse into demolition. Jasmine Crockett, however, remained perfectly still. Her hands rested lightly on her podium. Her eyes locked on Barron's with an unwavering calm. Where his face flushed with adrenaline, hers radiated composure. She didn't interrupt. She didn't bite back. Instead, she let the silence after his words linger, letting the weight of his hostility expose itself. The moderators attempted to steer the conversation back to policy, but Barron refused to relent. He waved away their questions, circling back again and again. "She doesn't have the experience. She doesn't have the judgment. She doesn't have the strength. Unfit, unfit, unfit." Each repetition was meant to drill the word into the minds of the viewers at home, to brand her with doubt before she could build her defense. But repetition has a double edge. It can persuade, but it can also reveal desperation. As the minutes dragged on, the air thickened with tension. Some in the crowd nodded along with Barron's bravado. Others frowned, whispering to their neighbors, unsettled by his fixation. It no longer felt like a debate. It felt like a personal trial, and the audience was the jury. Jasmine's composure only heightened the contrast. Her refusal to take the bait left Barron striking at shadows, his energy bouncing off a wall of calm resolve. The more he attacked, the more it appeared as though he was struggling to land a blow. Finally, when the moderator pressed him to pivot to healthcare policy, Barron smirked and cut her off. "America doesn't need another weak politician with excuses. We need strength. And Crockett? She's the definition of weakness." That was the moment the audience gasped. It wasn't policy anymore. It was personal degradation on full display, and millions were watching live. Jasmine inhaled slowly, her face still composed, her eyes steady. She had let him dig the hole deeper, word by word, confident in what she carried with her. Then, just as the tension threatened to snap, she shifted her posture. She leaned slightly forward, her voice measured but firm. "Mr. Trump," she began, her tone even. "You've repeated the word unfit a dozen times tonight. But America deserves more than slogans. They deserve truth. And if we're going to talk about fitness to serve, then let's bring truth to the table." The hall fell quiet. The moderators leaned in. Barron's smirk faltered, if only for a fraction of a second. And then Jasmine reached into her folder. It was a small, deliberate motion, but it sent a jolt through the room. Every camera lens tightened. Every viewer at home sat up a little straighter. Whatever she was about to reveal, it wasn't in Barron's script. The silence was deafening. The anticipation electric. Even Barron, for all his bravado, paused to watch, his eyes narrowing as though trying to guess what weapon she was about to unleash. And then Jasmine Crockett laid her hand on a single sheet of paper, the edge of it gleaming under the stage lights. She looked up, her voice calm but edged with quiet thunder. America deserves to hear this. The cliffhanger hung in the air, the nation holding its breath, as Jasmine prepared to turn the debate upside down. The debate stage, moments before Jasmine Crockett's reveal, felt like the eye of a storm. The shouting, the applause, the relentless rhythm of attack and defense, it all collapsed into an eerie hush. Even the cameras seemed to lean in, their red recording lights blinking like watchful eyes. Jasmine's hand rested lightly on the paper inside her folder, her composure unshaken despite the weight of millions watching. She didn't rush. She didn't stammer. She knew that power lived in silence just as much as in sound, and so she let the pause linger until the anticipation became unbearable. Finally, she lifted her head, her voice calm yet resonant. "Mr. Trump has told America who he thinks I am, but perhaps it's time America hears in his own words who he really is." Gasps rippled across the audience. Barron leaned forward, his smirk twitching nervously at the edges. "What are you talking about?" He scoffed, attempting to dismiss her tone with bravado, but the quiver in his voice betrayed him. Jasmine's fingers pressed a small button on a discreet device, and suddenly the hall was filled with his voice. Barron Trump's unmistakable cadence, recorded privately, echoing against the marble and glass. "Honestly, I don't care about these policies. I just need to win. People will believe anything if you say it loud enough. The crowd froze. Eyes widened. Journalists fumbled for their phones and laptops, their fingers flying as they scrambled to capture every syllable. The recording continued, Barron's voice dripping with arrogance. Half of this stuff? I don't even understand it. But it doesn't matter. It's about the show. It's about the name. That's what they vote for. Gasps turned to murmurs. Some in the audience shook their heads. Others pressed their hands to their mouths in disbelief. The debate moderators exchanged glances, shocked, unsure if they were witnessing history or a career imploding in real time. And then came the dagger. Barron's voice, smug and unguarded. Crockett? She's tough, sure. She knows her stuff. But she'll never beat me. People don't want real work. They want a Trump. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time all night, Barron's mask cracked. The color drained from his face. His smirk vanished, replaced by a stiff jaw and darting eyes. His usual swagger shrank under the weight of his own words, playing on loop before the nation. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or raise her hands in triumph. She simply stood there, letting the recording speak louder than any counter-argument ever could. Her calm presence in that moment made the contrast impossible to ignore. His arrogance versus her quiet strength. The audience reaction swelled. Some gasped audibly. Others erupted into whispers that buzzed through the hall like electricity. Reporters rushed toward the stage perimeter, calling their editors, dictating headlines before the debate had even ended. News tickers began scrolling across the bottom of live feeds. Breaking, secret recording of Barron Trump. Exposed on debate stage, Barron tried to recover, his voice trembling with forced confidence. That's fake. A deep fake. Lies, she's desperate. But the damage was done. The audience didn't buy it, not when his voice was so distinct, so familiar. His denial sounded weaker than silence. One moderator leaned toward him, her tone professional yet piercing. Mr. Trump, are you saying this isn't your voice? Barron hesitated. That single pause, the second he couldn't immediately answer, was enough to seal the impression in the public's mind. The hesitation spoke louder than denial. Meanwhile, Jasmine didn't attack further. She didn't need to. She folded her hands neatly on the podium and spoke with measured clarity. America doesn't need slogans. They don't need arrogance. They need leaders who show up to do the work, who fight for people, not for their own last name. Tonight, you heard the truth directly from Mr. Trump. I don't need to add anything more. Her words landed like a gavel striking wood. Final, irrefutable. The hall erupted, not in cheers, but in a chaos of reactions. Some in Barron's camp booed, shouting accusations of fake and setup. Others sat stunned, unable to reconcile the confident figure they had admired with the unmasked, arrogance now echoing in their ears. Reporters swarmed their laptops, headlines exploding across social media in real time. Within seconds, hashtags trended globally. UNFIT, the recording, debate bombshell, and in the center of it all, Barron Trump stood frozen. His usual arsenal, confidence, swagger, dismissal, suddenly useless. For the first time, his name alone wasn't enough to shield him. The cameras zoomed in close, capturing every flicker of panic in his eyes. The world was seeing him not as the unshakable heir to a dynasty, but as a young man unprepared for the weight of accountability. Meanwhile, Jasmine looked almost serene, as though years of battles and dismissals had prepared her for this exact moment. She didn't bask in triumph. She didn't raise her voice. She simply let the truth ripple outward, and ripple it did. Within minutes, clips of the recording were clipped, shared, dissected across platforms. Talk show hosts interrupted broadcasts. Political analysts leaned forward in their chairs, stunned by the magnitude of what had just happened. What began as a debate moment was already transforming into a cultural flashpoint. In living rooms across America, viewers replayed the recording, shaking their heads in disbelief. Supporters who once cheered Barron's bravado sat silent, questioning what they had heard. Others who had dismissed Jasmine Crockett as underdog suddenly saw her as something else entirely, a force. Barron's face told the story more clearly than words ever could. His confidence drained, his posture stiffened. His eyes darted like a man searching for an exit that didn't exist. And Jasmine? She stood grounded, her calm presence magnified by the chaos swirling around her. She had delivered not just a rebuttal, but a reckoning. And as the cameras captured that frozen tableau, Barron, shrinking under the weight of his own words, Jasmine standing tall in silence. The audience knew they were witnessing more than a debate. They were watching a shift. The cliffhanger was already in motion, because within minutes the ripple effect spread far beyond that stage. The moment Jasmine Crockett pressed play, she didn't just win a debate, she unleashed an earthquake. By the time the moderators wrapped up the closing statements, the tremors were already racing outward, reaching millions of screens across America and far beyond. On Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, the clip of Barron, Trump's voice contradicting everything he had, just claimed on stage, circulated with the speed of lightning. Hashtags mushroomed into trending dominance, were UNFIT, mic drop moment, Crockett vs. Trump, and simply the recording. Within an hour, millions of posts, shares, and stitches dissected, remixed, and memified the 30 seconds that changed the debate forever. One meme showed Barron's confident smirk in split screen. On the left, before the recording. On the right, after, his face pale and jaw locked. The caption? Expectation versus reality. Another viral post paired Jasmine's calm expression as the recording played with the caption, "When you brought receipts and the receipt paper." Late-night comedians and TikTok creators jumped in within minutes. Edits layered dramatic music, slow builds, sudden drops as Barron's words, "I just need to win," echoed ominously before the beat crashed. For many viewers, it wasn't just politics anymore, it was spectacle, entertainment, cultural shorthand. But beneath the humor was something heavier. Commentators across the political spectrum branded it the takedown of the year. On cable news, analysts replayed the moment on split screens, some with awe, others with grim caution. One panelist on MSNBC leaned forward, shaking his head. "We haven't seen a moment like this in decades. This wasn't just a gaffe, this was an unmasking." Meanwhile, conservative outlets scrambled to mount a defense. Some claimed the audio was doctored, a high-tech smear job. Others pivoted to accuse Jasmine of unfair ambush tactics. But even among defenders, there was unease. Off-air, reporters whispered that campaign strategists were in meltdown mode, realizing that once a soundbite goes viral, it never truly dies. For Jasmine's allies, the mood was electric. Civil rights leaders, progressive voices, and grassroots organizers flooded timelines with praise. Words like poise, courage, grace under fire became common refrains. Clips of her standing silently as the recording played became a kind of modern, political iconography, the calm in the storm. One viral tweet summed it up in 7 words. She didn't yell. She didn't gloat. She won. The impact went deeper than partisan politics. The recording, with Barron admitting he cared more about the show than policy, tapped into something raw in the national psyche. For many, it symbolized entitlement laid bare, arrogance dismantled by truth. The image of a young woman of color standing calmly as the heir to a dynasty unraveled before her became instantly symbolic, more than politics. It felt cultural. In classrooms and coffee shops, the debate moment sparked heated discussions. Was this the beginning of a generational shift? A sign that authenticity could finally overpower spectacle? For younger audiences, especially Gen Z, Jasmine's calm mic drop became shorthand for accountability. Proof that power could still be challenged, even in an era dominated by dynasties and names. That night, late-night monologues opened with the clip. Jimmy Fallon quipped, "Barron said it was about the show," and then Jasmine gave him the season finale. Stephen Colbert replayed the line, "People will believe anything if you say it loud enough," before leaning into the camera. "Not tonight, buddy. Not tonight." By morning, newspapers across the country had splashed stills of Jasmine and Barron across their front pages. The New York Times headline read, "The recording heard round the country." Meanwhile, the Washington Post chose a sharper angle. Crockett turns the tables, truth as a weapon. But perhaps the clearest proof of impact wasn't in headlines, it was in silence. Barron Trump, usually quick to tweet defiance or post rebuttals, went dark. For hours, his official accounts posted nothing. That silence, amplified by the cacophony around him, spoke volumes. In contrast, Jasmine's camp released only a single, understated statement. "We don't need to say more." The people heard for themselves. That restraint only deepened the resonance. She hadn't just won a debate exchange, she had created a cultural symbol, one that would be replayed for months, perhaps years to come. By the end of the news cycle, the clip had been viewed over 100 million times across platforms. Teachers were already referencing it in civics lessons. Parents were texting it to their kids. Political strategists were studying it frame by frame. And as analysts reminded audiences, sometimes history doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in a pause, a quiet press of a button, and the simple power of letting someone's own words dismantle them. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just defended herself, she had altered the narrative. And as the ripple effects spread across culture, politics and public imagination, one thing was clear: the shockwaves were only beginning. When the stage lights dimmed and the crowd began to file out, a sense of clarity lingered in the air. Something far greater than a political clash had just unfolded. The night was no longer about sound bites, nor about which side would dominate the next news cycle. It had become something deeper, a meditation on what leadership truly means. Jasmine Crockett, standing at her podium with that same unshakable composure, took one final moment to speak, not to Barron, not to the moderators, but to the nation watching. Her voice carried none of the heat that had defined the earlier exchanges. Instead, it was steady, deliberate, and rooted in conviction. "Fitness to serve," she began, "is not about wealth, power, or legacy. It's about service, honesty, and resilience." The words settled like a balm over a room that had been buzzing with shock and tension. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth itself had already amplified her presence. Her statement reframed the entire evening, pulling the focus away from scandal and spectacle towards something timeless, the values that should define public service. For months, Barron had leaned on his last name, his inherited platform, his untouchable aura of inevitability. He had painted himself as the embodiment of strength, dismissing opponents as small, irrelevant, unworthy. But in that final moment, his carefully constructed image collapsed under the weight of his own words. What was left standing was not his arrogance, but Jasmine's dignity. Dignity, that quiet strength that doesn't demand attention, but commands respect. That was the lesson of the night. In a political landscape where volume often substitutes for vision, Jasmine had shown that integrity could still cut through the noise. She hadn't shouted him down, nor humiliated him with insults. She simply let the truth speak, and in doing so, reminded everyone watching that arrogance is loud, but dignity is enduring. The moral crystallized with startling simplicity. Arrogance may rise fast, but dignity outlasts it. Viewers at home felt it. Teachers, parents, immigrants, young people hungry for authenticity, all saw themselves in her restraint, her refusal to be baited into the mud. She embodied the principle that leadership isn't about dominance. It's about stewardship. Not about entitlement, but about responsibility. Her closing line wrapped it in words that would echo far beyond the stage. This wasn't just a debate. It was a reminder of what kind of leaders America deserves. The audience erupted, not with the fractured mix of cheers and jeers that had defined the earlier exchanges, but with something more unified, a standing ovation that transcended party lines. It wasn't for the takedown. It was for the reminder. And in living rooms across the country, viewers nodded in quiet agreement. Parents turned to their kids and said, "That's what integrity looks like." Students took to social media to write, "That's the kind of leader we want." Even skeptics, those who had doubted Jasmine's ability to hold her ground, were left acknowledging that her calm had carried more force than any roar could muster. Because in the end, this moment wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett versus Barron Trump. It was about two visions of leadership, colliding, one built on arrogance, the other on dignity, one rooted in privilege, the other in perseverance, one shouting for attention, the other commanding respect through truth. History, it seemed, had chosen its lesson. As Jasmine stepped down from the stage, she carried no triumphal smirk, no exaggerated victory lap, just a quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that knows real power comes not from crushing an opponent, but from lifting a standard. And in that, she left the nation with a simple, unforgettable truth. Leaders are not defined by their names, their fortunes, or their stage presence. They are defined by their character. That night, dignity triumphed over arrogance. And for a moment, brief, but luminous, America was reminded of the leaders it not only wants, but deserves. Barron Trump called her unfit. But in that debate, in that defining moment, Jasmine Crockett proved that her truth fit the moment and history perfectly. What unfolded wasn't just political theater. It was a reminder that arrogance may roar, but truth whispers louder. And when spoken with dignity, honesty has a power that no privilege, no legacy, no last name can silence. This story is more than one exchange on a debate stage. It's a reflection of the choices we face every day. What kind of leaders do we elevate? And what kind of values do we reward? Do we celebrate entitlement or resilience? Do we follow arrogance or integrity? Jasmine's poise showed us that leadership isn't about crushing others. It's about standing firm for what matters. It's about proving that service, honesty, and resilience will always outlast empty confidence. That's the kind of lesson worth carrying forward, not just in politics, but in life. And here's where you come in. If you believe dignity should always triumph over arrogance, if you believe leaders should be chosen for their integrity, not their privilege, then be part of this conversation. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next story that challenges power with truth. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder that arrogance can crumble, but dignity endures. Join our growing community of viewers who refuse to accept noise as leadership and who are ready to demand better. Because tonight wasn't just a debate. Tonight was a reminder, and together we can keep that reminder alive. Truth doesn't need to shout. Truth only needs to be heard. And with your voice added, its echo will only grow stronger.